Welcome to the realm of science fiction, where imagination knows no bounds and extraordinary stories unfold. Enjoy the adventure. Ash still clung to the bones of planets. Across the neutral zone, wreckage drifted like forgotten prayers, fused alloy, shattered flags, corpses in orbital decay. No empire claimed this scar, though both had bled for it. The stars above flickered. Not from distance, but from the radiation storm still snarling through fractured space. No one spoke of victory here. Only survival. The truce had stopped the slaughter, not the hatred. Zathari warbarges now floated silent, their hulls embossed with kill-count glyphs. Human stations blinked with cautious light, their weapons powered down but not forgotten. What once burned with rage now smoldered beneath formality. Diplomats walked where soldiers had fallen. Every breath in this void was a gamble. In the silence between declarations and disarmament, history waited, not to be erased, but challenged. Here, where fire had once ruled and steel had once screamed, something new prepared to take root, something fragile, something defiant. Corin Vasquez stepped forward wrapped in quiet defiance. No gun hung at his side, no armor weighed his shoulders. He bore only a worn diplomatic badge and the hard lines of a man carved by too many goodbyes. His uniform bore creases from war and peace alike, the same fabric that once soaked in blood, now repurposed for negotiation. His limp was subtle but deliberate, not weakness, reminder. A leg shattered on Tarsis Prime, mended by crude metal, and stitched resolve. The scars weren't hidden, they didn't need to be, they made him real. He had killed before, he had wept after. He knew the sharp taste of silence after an orbital barrage and the soundless ache of losing comrades to vacuum and betrayal, and now he chose words. In the theater of alien customs and brittle treaties, Corin was not a peacemaker. He was proof that even war-forged steel could bend, without breaking. Vael'Shara did not walk, she commanded space. Every step echoed with centuries of conquest stitched into her bones. Her armor wasn't merely protection, it was legacy. Etched with victories, sealed in the blood of fallen foes, its jagged crimson glyphs declared her identity louder than words ever could. To the Zathari, she wasn't a diplomat. She was memory, made flesh and metal, chosen by the elder caste not to speak but to stand, a breathing reminder that war was never far from the table. Her scars weren't shame, they were scripture. A deep crescent carved along her side marked her survival against the Krivox broodmother, another across her shoulder, earned when she disarmed a human captain and let him live, a moment still whispered of as heresy. Her presence was a weapon, and in her mind, humans hadn't come to talk. They had come to measure how close they could get to extinction before blinking. Thesi, words were correct. The syllables pronounced with rigid precision, each vowel balanced atop a centuries-old agreement. But no one was listening to the language. They were listening to the silence between them, because the silence was louder. On one side, a species that bled logic and ritual from its veins. On the other, a species too chaotic to be predicted, too stubborn to be broken. Every sentence became a chess move, every nod a challenge. Veiled courtesy became tactical feints. Their bodies never moved, yet a war of instincts raged beneath the surface. Vael'Shara's breathing slowed. Corin's eyes never left hers. To outsiders it was a peaceful exchange. To them it was the beginning of something more volatile than open combat. Words were spoken not to build trust, but to test how far it could stretch before snapping. And both sides knew one twitch too far and diplomacy would bleed. No sound rose from the gathering, yet tension rippled like heat distortion across the tribunal space. Vael'Shara stood still, too still. Her hand moved with ritualistic precision, unlatching, a single layer of her ceremonial armor. The plate slid off like a whispered insult against tradition, and then silence became breathless. There upon her chest, carved like a history etched into flesh, the scar. Not a wound, a story. Zathari culture revered such marks, not for their pain, but for what they symbolized: survival beyond protocol, triumph born of instinct when tradition failed. But never were they meant to be shown in parley, never to an outsider. The scar was not her weakness, it was her declaration. A message passed without words. This was not diplomacy. This was warning cloaked in vulnerability, a challenge writ in flesh and defiance. She bared her past, not to invite sympathy, but to dare understanding. Corin didn't move. Not for the twitch of gauntlets, not for the ceremonial challenge now scorching the air between them. He stood, bare of armor and blade, not by oversight but by defiance. Because war had taught him one thing: any fool can swing steel. But it takes something else to drop it. Vael'Shara's gaze burned like plasma. Her scar dared him to look away. He didn't. What she expected was fear. What she saw instead was recognition. Not the kind soldiers offer rivals. No, deeper. The kind only survivors exchange when words fall short of grief. And in that locked gaze something ancient cracked. No declarations, no parley, no raised voice, only silence, held like a blade to the throat of tradition. And the warrior who'd never been bested met a man who refused to play her game, and somehow won. The air between them no longer belonged to either world. It pulsed, sharp, sacred, charged by histories written in blood and ruin. Zithari warriors clutched their weapons with fingers twitching for permission. Human envoys clenched jawlines, waiting for the inevitable rupture. But neither Corin nor Vael'Shara moved. No strike, no step, no sound. Just breath, held, measured, dangerous. What began as a challenge had become a question. And in that stillness, tradition trembled. In that stillness, peace pretended not to be fragile. In that stillness, the galaxy watched a new kind of war begin. Not fought with blades, but with the unbearable silence of restraint. The sky banners of Zithari hung like thunderclouds, broad, blood-red, rippling with the weight of names too sacred to speak. Under them she stood, unbending, unyielding, unafraid. The rite of veritas was no mere tradition. It was blood etched into protocol. It was law birthed in fire and carried by bone. It was truth that demanded pain, not poetry. And she, Vael'Shara, bore it like a second skin. Her armor glinted with etched sigils, each a kill, each a loss. Her gaze swept the gathered. Warriors bowed in reverence. Elders flinched in quiet fear. So even the winds seemed to hold their breath. She didn't speak of truth, she embodied it. Each step toward the circle of challenge was a sermon. Each movement sang of ancestors who chose death over silence. She drew no blade. She didn't need to, because this wasn't a challenge of weapons. It was a challenge of memory, of legacy, of pain unflinching. To the Zithari, truth had always been what survived the cut. And today, standing beneath ancestral skycloth with the weight of 1,000 years in her breath, Vael'Shara was prepared to bleed for honesty, even if it meant bleeding alone. He did not kneel. He did not salute. He did not even glance at the ceremonial blade resting beside him, gleaming with ancestral polish and polished expectation. Instead, he raised empty hands, scabbed knuckles, calloused palms, fingers that once pulled triggers now trembling with conviction. In the silence that followed, the tension fractured like brittle glass. No protocol, no war hymn, no rehearsed words, only defiance. Corin Vasquez had bled before for truth, bled in jungles that screamed and on planets that didn't know Earth, had a sky. He'd traded too much soul for survival, and now in the presence of warriors who measured worth in scars, he offered none of that currency. No more blood, not for show. Not for peace, not even for history. The Zithari watched, still as statues. His attaché bristled. One delegate whispered treason, another whispered hope. He was not just breaking formation, he was unmaking expectation. In a chamber built for strength, he wielded vulnerability like a blade. A soldier's courage is easy when armored, but to walk into the circle unarmed, to face warriors bred from war without a shield, without a lie, that was something older than conquest. That was something human. The silence cracked, not with war cries, but with whispers. Murmurs rippled like heat across steel as the Zithari. Observers tried to make sense of the breach. He had refused the blade. He had not challenged, not submitted, not complied, and yet he had not fallen. Among a race bred to measure worth through pain and proof, this gesture, the absence of force, echoed louder than any clash of metal. Their dialects faltered, guttural, tongues stuttering over new truths they'd never trained for. One elder tilted their head, another blinked too long. None spoke the words aloud, but the air buzzed with it. If this is not weakness, then what is it? He had not broken the ritual. He had broken their expectation of it. The rite was meant to bend the foreigner, test the sinews of his defiance until one side gave. Instead, It was the structure itself that wavered. Cracks, forming not in protocol, but in belief. Was dominance still dominance if it demanded submission from those who offered understanding? And in that uncertainty, something began to unravel. Not in him, but in them. Because sometimes the most dangerous ritual to a warrior is not one denied. It's one rewritten, without permission. She unfastened the plate, not as surrender, but as invocation. Across generations of war worship and conquest rites, the Zathari had seen blood spill, bones shatter, oaths burn. But never this. Not like this. Her armor struck the ground with a finality that no weapon could mimic. It wasn't the sound of metal meeting earth that silenced the crowd. It was what came after. No blade, no stance, just skin, scarred, seared, sanctified. The line across her chest wasn't ceremonial, it was real, too jagged to be surgical, too cruel to be a warning. It was where life had once considered abandoning her but chose not to. A wound that had cut through the warrior to reveal the woman, and in that scar truth whispered, not dominance but survival. The Zathari didn't blink, the humans didn't breathe, because for a caste raised to show no weakness, she had offered the purest kind. Not to shame, not to threaten, but to say, I have nothing to prove, I've already faced what you fear, and that silence, sharper than any blade, echoed longer than any battle cry. She did not need steel to speak, her scar did all the talking, and every warrior in the hall listened. He looked at her scar the way poets study ruins, searching not for destruction, but for the story that withstood it. Where others might flinch, he didn't. Where others might pity, he honored. His gaze did not drift, it anchored, as if the scar, not the blade, was the true weapon. Not forged in steel, but in pain and will and the refusal to die. Then came the words, not shouted, not ceremonially offered, whispered, like truths that know their own power. That scar. It means you survived something that wanted you gone. It's beautiful, and something ancient cracked, not in her but around her, the framework of doctrine, the lattice of pride, the armor no one could see but everyone wore. His words didn't strike, they unmade, not with force, with acknowledgement. Zathari knew how to win wars, but they'd never been praised for surviving. One. And now one of their deadliest, one bred for victory, raised in fire, stood silent, stunned, undone by the one species too reckless to lie and too fragile to fake courage. In that moment, neither warrior moved. But the war, it shifted, because truth, when spoken with reverence, has the power to rewrite everything, even enemies. The ritual was crafted for dominance, not for truth. Its architecture was one of calculation, of warnings unspoken, each gesture rehearsed, each phrase a blade. Vael'Shara had trained a lifetime to master it, but in this moment her pulse betrayed her. Faster, louder, human. She had bared her scar to demonstrate endurance. She hadn't expected reverence. The human envoy had offered no blade, no challenge, only acknowledgement, and that was not in the protocols. Tension rippled through the chamber like heat through fractured glass. The other humans shifted subtly, hands brushing near hilts hidden beneath ceremonial garb. The Zathari elite narrowed their stances, weight distributed, with surgical precision. No one moved, yet everyone might. One wrong breath, one twitch, one broken silence, and war would return, faster than thought, hotter than vengeance. But it didn't, because Vael'Shara's eyes remained locked on his, because the envoy's hands stayed empty, and his voice never rose in triumph, and because what passed between them, between scar and gaze, between fire and refusal, was not strategy. It was surrender, not to weakness, but to possibility. The line they crossed wasn't drawn in dirt. It was etched in doctrine. And for once, no one stepped back. They all stepped through. The weight of her lineage pressed against her spine, etched in every ceremonial motion, whispered in every ancestor's breath within her bones. Tradition demanded that she strike, that she reclaim authority with steel, that she silence the question with blood. But her feet did not move forward. They stepped back, not out of fear, not in surrender, but in something far more dangerous, uncertainty. Because the human had broken no rules, yet dismantled everything that made her feel certain of who she was. He had not disarmed her. He had disarmed the moment. No blade, no roar, just words spoken like a challenge no war had taught her to answer. He hadn't threatened her dominance. He had ignored it, and in doing so had made her wonder if dominance had ever mattered at all. For the first time since childhood, her stance lost the echo of drilled precision. It became her own. And she felt lighter, exposed, alive. Eyes from both species watched, confused and uneasy, because something ancient had been expected, and something new had arrived instead. Not peace, not war, but curiosity, a ripple in doctrine, a fracture in certainty, where tradition ended. This was where something truly human began, and she wanted to follow it, not crush it. The silence presses harder than a battle chant. Vael'Shara sits alone, armor loosened, blade still sheathed. Around her the chamber breathes ancient memory, walls once carved for declarations of power, now echoing something softer, something she cannot name. Her mind returns to him, the human who did not flinch, who did not reach for the weapon. Who called her scar beautiful? It should have been meaningless, a trick of diplomacy, a calculated misdirection. But the words hadn't been barbed. They had landed gently, too gently, and that is what unsettled her, because no adversary had ever dared see her wound and not recoil. They either glorified it with fear or dismissed it with condescension. Never reverence, never something intimate. Now that mark, etched across her chest like the claw of a dying god, feels less like proof of survival and more like a question she has no answer for. What had she survived for exactly? Her training had never prepared her for pause. The rite taught her to strike, to dominate, to silence uncertainty with steel. Yet the human, unarmed and quiet, had parried centuries of doctrine with nothing but a steady gaze. She doesn't doubt her power. She doubts its direction, because strength without clarity is just noise, and hers, once symphonic, now rings hollow in her ears. She rises not because duty calls, but because her soul aches to understand, not him, herself. This wasn't surrender. It was the slow crumble of a wall she hadn't realized was a prison. The absence of blood, he had carved something far deeper than any blade ever could, and now beneath the scar she once brandished as proof of life, something begins to stir. A longing. A curiosity, and for the first time in cycles, Vael'Shara is afraid. Not of him, but of what she might become. There had been another moment, long before the Zethari, a different battlefield, different stars, but the weight on Corin's shoulders had felt the same. The Kuros Rift, that jagged stretch of fractured space where debris sang like broken glass, and time felt thinner, crueler. His unit had been outnumbered, outgunned, and already written off in the command logs. Just one more scar in the void humanity had decided to explore and claim. They could have held the line. They could have gone out screaming. Instead, Corin ordered silence. No counterstrike, no last stand. He chose surrender. Not to the enemy, but to the idea that violence should not be reflex, that humanity could still surprise the stars, not with force, but with choice. He watched good people die for that decision, watched honor twist into a rumor of cowardice, watched command send condolences that rang hollow, and when he came back, they greeted him with medals, as if metal could weigh as much as grief. The smile he wears now isn't warmth, it's armor, forged not in victory but in remembrance. It's how he hides the voices that still whisper in his dreams, names he doesn't speak aloud, faces he sees in the quiet between breaths. They died so he could try again. So when the blade was offered on Zethari ground, Corin didn't flinch, he remembered, and chose again. Not as a diplomat, not as a soldier, but as a man who had once begged the universe to let him rewrite one moment. Just one. Now he carries ghosts behind his calm, not because they haunt him, but because they guide him, and if the stars think peace is weakness, let them learn what true strength costs. No banners hang. No trumpets sound. Just a table, wide enough to hold old hostilities, yet narrow enough that neither can look away. They don't speak at first, because words are heavy here, too fragile, too often used to sharpen divisions rather than bridge them. Instead, their eyes do the reaching. Vael'Shara's gaze is not the one that challenged with a blade. It watches with the wariness of a creature still armored, but unsure why. The scar on her chestplate was once her shield. Now it's a memory laid bare. Corin doesn't flinch under it. He meets her gaze, not as a rival, not as prey, but as someone who's also had everything burned down and still chose to walk through the ash. A phrase stumbles out. His Zathari is clumsy, guttural, wrong in tone, but it's honest, a twitch of her mandible. Almost amusement. She answers in clipped, accented English, the syllables jagged but trying. They trade these fragments like rare minerals. Delicate. Precious. Their dialects don't align, but their meanings do. No translator can catch the pauses between words. The way her clawed fingers curl slightly whenever he speaks gently. The subtle flex of his jaw whenever she speaks of honor. What begins in silence becomes something else entirely. Not peace. Not yet. But an understanding. Carved from suspicion. Tempered by shared pain. Hardened in the forge of defiance. Neither was raised to trust. But here, between ancient rites and future wars, two warriors scarred by tradition find something they were never taught to seek. A new language. Not spoken, but felt. And in that unspoken exchange, where eyes hold more weight than history, something ancient begins to erode. Not all walls fall with force, some collapse. Because someone finally chose not to reinforce them, whispers once tethered by discipline now scatter like ash on wind. Behind opaque veil chambers stitched in authority, the Zathari High Council speaks not in verdict, but in venom. The warrior they once paraded as a symbol of supremacy is now a symbol of deviation. To hesitate is to betray, to show curiosity is to invite infection. And Vael'Shara, by standing still before a human, has become a fracture in the blade. Their voices slither through protocol. Unbecoming, they say, unaligned. But the words are masks. Beneath them stirs fear, of a mind not conquered but changed. Across the divide, the humans are no quieter. Encrypted pings cross Corin's interface, each message colder than the last. Diplomatic restraint, risk of contamination, orders dressed as warnings. Cease further contact, your proximity undermines mission integrity. What they mean is simpler. You're getting too close. He reads them all and deletes nothing. In Timwine, two empires sworn to opposing truths, loyalty now demands distance. But for both Vael'Shara and Corin, the choice is no longer between allegiance and defiance. It's between obedience and understanding. She stands accused of softness. He is threatened for compassion. Neither bends. She meditates in silence, yet her claws flex with unrest. He reviews the Council's encrypted dispatches, yet refuses to acknowledge compliance. They both know what is coming. It's not a war of fleets or flame, it's something older, more personal, more dangerous. The war to define what honor means. To Vael'Shara, dishonor is not disobedience. It is fear masquerading as tradition. To Corin, disloyalty is not contact. It is abandoning the chance to evolve. And though their councils speak in threats and ultimatums, neither warrior listens. Because once trust takes root in foreign soil, it stops belonging to flags. It begins to belong to people. The summit was meant to mark the threshold of something greater. It became a target instead. They came cloaked in honorless silence, blades carved with sigils long banned by the Zathari Accord. The rogue war clan didn't arrive to speak. They arrived to erase, not a man, not a moment, but a possibility. Corin stood not at a podium, nor behind defense shields. He stood exactly as he had from the beginning, unguarded, unarmed, unflinching. But that made him the most dangerous thing in the hall, not a weapon of war, a symbol of change, of peace, of trespass into the sacred rigidity the old clans clung to. The first strike wasn't aimed at the heart. It was ceremonial, meant to humiliate, to draw blood in public, to provoke retaliation. It never landed, not because Corin dodged, but because Vael'Shara moved first. Steel clanged like thunder inside hallowed silence. Her armor moved not as duty, but as defiance. She did not protect Corin because of orders. She did not raise her, blade for glory. She did it because something deeper had anchored itself within her. Belief. And belief, when kindled in someone once forged for obedience, becomes ungovernable. The war clan expected fear. They found fury. Not just from her. Others rose one by one, delegates, observers, aides. Zathari and human alike did not flee. They formed a barrier, uncoordinated, imperfect, but immovable. There were no commands, only choice. And choice, when made in defiance of tradition, becomes revolution. Corin did not speak. He didn't need to. The war clan fell back, not defeated, but destabilized. They hadn't come for blood. They'd come for a narrative that humans were weak, naive, manipulable, that peace was surrender, that the right still ruled. Instead, they found unity, unrehearsed, undeclared, real. In the silence after, something irreversible had occurred. The old sigils had moved against the tide of change and been drowned in it. What had once been a summit became a reckoning, and in the middle of the sacred halls where blades once dictated fate, it was not death that moved the future forward. It was refusal. Refusal to yield. Refusal to hate. Refusal to stand down. From that moment on, Corin Vasquez was no longer seen as merely a representative of Earth. He was a threat to every war that would now never begin. The air still crackled with the scent of plasma discharge. The metallic tang of blood, sharper than any blade, hung between every breath. And yet the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was recalibration. Vael'Shara stood above the fallen, her blade slick with the proof of her decision. The strike hadn't been hesitant. It had been surgical, decisive, not of rage but clarity. The moment she moved to shield the human, she didn't choose Corin. She chose herself. For the first time in her storied lineage, she fought not for protocol, not for caste, not for tradition, but for principle. And that principle now stood staring back at her, unarmed and unchanged. He had not begged for rescue. He had not asked for sacrifice. But still, she bled for him. Her people watched, some with fury, others with fear, but most with silence. Because they knew she had done what none dared. She broke the right, not with words, not even with rebellion. She broke it by honoring it too deeply, by defending something more sacred than ancestry. Possibility. The old ways demanded loyalty. They got truth. Instead, her fingers unclasped. The blade clattered to the floor, an offering, a refusal, a challenge. Moments later, her crest, the mark of her rank, followed. It did not fall, it was placed deliberately, without shame. She stepped back, not in retreat, but in transformation. And all eyes, even Corin's, tried to follow the trajectory of her choice and failed. Because it was not linear, it was seismic. One act, one warrior, one decision, rippled through doctrine thicker than blood. The human didn't speak. He simply met her eyes, not to claim victory, but to acknowledge the weight she now carried. A weight they would carry together. The tribunal would convene. Orders would be issued. Blame would be traded like currency. But it would be too late, because history had already shifted. A Zethari warrior spilled blood in defense of a human, and then renounced the very empire that forged her to do it. It wasn't betrayal, it was evolution, and evolution never asks permission. The chamber was carved in reverence, every edge older than the language spoken within it. It had borne witness to judgment before, but never like this. Not in living memory, not in defiance of legacy. Vael'Shara stood beneath the ancestral sigils, her breath steady, her gaze unyielding. Her name echoed through the stone, once as a title, now as an accusation. The council spoke with layered voices, overlapping tones of lineage and law. But beneath their words pulsed a deeper question. Why did you protect him? Honor was not just a word to the Zethari. It was a structure, a living architecture of obedience and blood. To place a human above that structure was not insubordination, it was heresy, and yet she made no plea. Across the divide, Corin received the communiqué. His orders were brief. Return to Sol Command. Terminate contact. Prepare for tribunal review. They didn't say traitor, but they didn't need to. The implication carried the same weight. The bridge between them, so carefully forged in silence, in shared scars, in the refusal to strike, now trembled under the pressure of institutions older than trust. Vael'Shara spoke only once. And what she said wasn't defense, it was revelation. She didn't act for the human, she acted because of what he showed her, that strength was not dominance, and survival was not submission. That to hold a blade was not power, but to know when not to lift it was, the council murmured. Some recoiled, others grew still. Corin, thousands of kilometers away, whispered the final phrase of his encrypted reply. Not a protest, not a goodbye, just one word, understood. But in both hearts, hers and his, echoed something unspoken, louder than any sentence could hold. They had seen each other, and now nothing ancient could make them unsee it. Her voice did not waver. It did not rise in defiance nor fall in humility. It arrived, clear, deliberate, final, like the sound of something ancient breaking open. She requested a dual testimony, not a trial, not a defense, a witnessing, shared, one human, one Vael'Shara, equal before the circle of judgment. The silence that followed stretched past decorum, past disbelief. The tribunal, avatars of unbroken lineage and law, stared down at her as if she had just named stars that didn't exist. No Vael'Shara had ever relinquished sole right to their honor. No outsider had ever set foot within the circle, let alone stood inside it as an equal. Yet she offered it, freely, fully, and in doing so, bound herself to a path that led neither forward nor back, but into a space uncharted by either world. Across systems, news cascaded like shockwaves. Vael'Shara dignitaries recoiled. Human networks spun in spirals of speculation. What did it mean? Was it strategy, submission, sedition? But Corin knew better. It was belief. She believed he would not tarnish the right, that he would stand before the tribunal with no armor, no blade, no rehearsed plea, and still be enough. And for the briefest moment, even the oldest minds on the council faltered. Not in power, but in certainty. Because somewhere between defiance and tradition, a question had formed: what if this was not betrayal, but evolution? And if so, what else might be possible? No words preceded the gesture. None were needed. Corin stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like a man walking back into the fire he'd once barely escaped. His fingers found the edge of his shirt, and with a movement that was neither proud nor ashamed, he lifted it, just high enough for the tribunal to see. The light caught the scars first. Jagged latticework across his side and ribs, not the clean scars of surgical repair, but the raw remnants of burn and kinetic trauma, where flesh had refused to yield and the vacuum had tried to claim him. Not one among them needed an explanation. Jericho 9. The orbit siege, the place where communications died before the crew did, where orders were to hold position, even as the hull peeled back and atmosphere screamed through ruptures like a dying thing, the place where silence was called protocol, and silence got people killed. Corin didn't speak of it. He didn't name the crewmates buried in nothingness, nor the command chain that chose optics over oxygen. But the scars said it all. Then Vael'Shara moved, no longer armored, no longer framed by tradition. Her hands found the seal at her collar, and again she shed the gleaming plates, not as protest but as prayer. The mark across her chest shone in the dim chamber. Not healed, never healed. The wound that almost unmade her, made visible. Sci-Fi. Warriors did not reveal scars to others, not willingly. Yet she stood bare in ritual, vulnerable by choice, and something shifted. Across that circle of judgment, in full view of two civilizations addicted to projection and denial, they rewrote the vocabulary of strength. Not with speeches, not with defiance, but with flesh that remembered pain and bore it anyway. Scars were not shame. They were the ledger of survival. Proof that trust had a cost, that silence could be violence, that some truths didn't come in, words or blades, but in the quiet between two broken survivors who refused to hide the wounds they carried, and for the first time, even the ancients could not look away. Silence did not follow like a pause. It dropped like a weight, a silence dense enough to warp the air, the kind that remembers, that replays sounds too sacred to speak aloud. No edict was passed, no horn was blown, and yet the breath of the chamber shifted, as if gravity itself had reoriented around what had just occurred. Vael'Shara elders, those sculpted in the old codes and cooled in 1,000 wars, showed cracks in their composure. Not from shame, but from something far rarer, recognition. Truth, stripped bare and raw, had pierced their sacred rituals without ceremony. One of the younger warriors, barely scarred, lifted her fingers to her chest. Not in salute, in instinct, as if the ache of a first wound remembered itself unbidden. The flesh remembers even when protocol forgets, especially then. Among the humans, something unsettled stirred. Orders had been clear: maintain decorum, reinforce boundaries, project strength. But protocol was paper, and this was flame. They had watched their own ambassador bear vulnerability like armor, had seen a Zathari elite kneel not to beg, but to bear. Something ancient had been stirred, and even the diplomatic corps, trained in restraint, felt it rise through marrow like a call they'd never learned to answer. Duty tensed like a tether, conviction pulled like a current, and somewhere between those two forces, the chamber held its breath for what came. Next would not be guided by rules but by echoes, echoes of wounds unspoken, echoes of strength redefined, echoes that once heard could not be silenced again. The final message came without ceremony, a cold, flashing cipher, the kind of transmission that bypassed emotion and aimed straight for compliance. Corin knew. The format, military-grade override. When it arrived, it didn't whisper. It roared, withdraw immediately or be recalled and court-martialed. He didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh consequences. He deleted it. No encryption, no fail-safe copy. Just silence where orders once echoed. He stepped forward, not as a soldier, not as a diplomat, but as a man who had seen too much blood spilled to bow before another miscalculation branded as duty. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The weight of it bent the silence. This is Corin Vasquez, envoy class. I speak now not as a representative of protocol, but as one who has bled for Earth's truths. I will not leave, I will not lie, and I will not pretend that peace requires silence to survive. The recorder pulsed red. Each syllable etched itself into official records, immutable, undeniable. He spoke of scars, of the alien warrior who showed him her truth, of the sacred halls now echoing not with war chants, but with the trembling breath of something new, something terrifying in its vulnerability, something worth protecting. My loyalty does not end with the brass that signs my orders. It extends to the lives we save by defying the script we were handed. If that makes me a traitor to caution, so be it. His voice cracked once, only once, but his eyes never wavered, not from the lens, not from the truth, and though no response came, he knew someone was listening, the kind of listening that changes everything. The moment held its breath. The tribunal, those ancient arbiters veiled in age-old judgment and star-forged authority, did not speak. They did not rise in fury, nor lower their heads in solemn decree. They simply stood, one by one, no gestures, no symbols, only the slow, deliberate sound of armored souls against sacred stone. No gavel struck, no verdict was carved into tradition. No words were cast to echo through the centuries, but that silence, it was thunder in disguise. It wasn't surrender, it wasn't acceptance, it was something stranger, something fragile, possibility. The chamber, where generations of warriors had been condemned or redeemed, now stood frozen in the kind of pause that reshapes futures. Dust motes glinted like frozen fireflies in the filtered sunbeams that pierced the atrium dome. The shadows of verdict, yet unwritten, stretched across the faces of those gathered. No one moved. Not the Vael'Shara who bore lineage as heavy as their armor, not the humans who came seeking diplomacy, but found revelation, and not the two who had stood at the center of it all, unarmored, unflinching, unashamed. The silence lingered just long enough for fear to wonder if it had been defeated, just long enough for hope to awaken, blinking. Something had changed, not in treaties or documents, but in the marrow of civilizations. The kind of change that has no flag or anthem, but instead grows quiet and relentless beneath the skin of the collective psyche. A human had defied recall. A warrior had lowered her blade, not in defeat, but in choice, and the tribunal had not punished them. It wasn't a victory, it wasn't even peace, but it was no longer war. Outside the chamber, the stars remained unchanged, but inside, beneath the cracked silence where judgment should have fallen, something ancient had shifted, and from that fracture, the future began to breathe. The void left by formal judgment becomes its own kind of decree. There is no trial, no medals, no parades, no execution of duty, nor executioner's blade. Vael'Shara's rank vanishes not in disgrace, but in disuse. Her armor is returned to the vault, sealed behind biometric locks, archived beside relics of wars past. No banner flies for her departure. No scroll names her successor, But those who once bowed now stare too long. They don't understand what to fear more, her strength or what she chose not to do with it. Corin's credentials expire with a quiet flicker in the Terran registry. No flags are lowered, no diplomats summoned. He simply fades from protocol, as if he was never meant to speak for Earth in the first place. But behind closed doors his name circulates, not as a representative, but as an anomaly. There are no declarations of wrongdoing, no confirmations of valor. Only a silence so deliberate it howls, yet something shifts. Vael'Shara youths whisper of her defiance not as failure, but as prophecy. Human aides forward encrypted logs to underground peace forums, where the details ignite debate, not dismissal. Nothing official is said, but everything is felt. Power, it turns out, doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it steps away from the podium. Sometimes it chooses the quiet over the grand. Sometimes it walks away with nothing but its legacy intact, and still changes everything. And in that silence, a seed takes root. The hull bears no crest, no glyphs etched into its flanks, no anthem played at launch. Its engines hum, old, but eager like a beast that remembers what it was built for. Once this vessel served in neutrality pacts, carrying envoys who spoke in safe, sanctioned tones. Now it waits for no directive, salutes no banner. It is diplomacy unbound, a ghost of protocol turned sanctuary of intent. They stand before it not as emissaries, but as outliers, stripped of title, allegiance, and script. Yet, for the first time, neither wears their absence like shame. This isn't exile. It's choice carved from consequence. No crew awaits them. No instructions whisper from terminals. The star drive flickers with potential, not direction. It's not escape they seek, but space between ideologies, between species. Between what was demanded and what could be dared, the galaxy won't know where to file them, and that is the point. In a universe choking on flags and factions, this ship isn't a refusal. It's a redefinition, a statement forged in silence and scars. Not every war ends with victory. Some end with a vessel no one can claim, sailing straight into a future no one can predict. The stars ahead offer no route, only questions. No chain of command binds their trajectory. No anthem scores their flight. What guides them now is quieter, subtler than allegiance or revenge. Curiosity, once punished, now becomes compass. They do not spy, they do not negotiate, they observe, they listen, they witness. In borderless silence, they drift toward ceremonies too ancient for translation, toward whispers exchanged in memory, not language, toward echoes buried beneath empires too proud to weep. Where others see ghosts, they record patterns, fractals, of grief, spirals of defiance, constellations of hope etched in ritual. They learn what both sides forgot, that stories do not obey maps. Through fractured lullabies and worn carvings, they see the shape of something vast, neither war nor truce but renewal. A myth reborn not in declarations but in presence, in showing up where no envoy was invited and asking no one to explain. What they build isn't legacy. It's proof. Proof that peace can be haunted but still holy. Proof that some missions aren't sanctioned, they're chosen. And in the quiet between star systems, where orders lose their weight and language dissolves, two travelers chase the shape of understanding and find that the universe listens back. Beyond contested stars and the long shadows of vanished wars, the vessel drifts where no banners wave and no orders echo. There, in the hush between signal towers and empires, they begin to speak, not with commands but with memory, not broadcasts, not declarations, not doctrine, just stories. A scar illuminated by a slow turn of light. A single sentence voiced into the void, trembling but unafraid. A moment once buried in silence, now etched in audio and waveform, pulsing outward like a heartbeat wrapped in static. They do not speak for nations. They speak because silence, left untouched, curdles into myth. Because fear thrives in things unsaid. Because the truth, when shared without armor, does not fracture. It binds. Some signals vanish in the black. Some are traced, decrypted, and buried beneath bureaucratic warnings. And some are answered. A whispered reply from a Zathari pilot, long thought dead. A coded poem returned by a human station burned in the last siege. A laugh, brief, broken, and real, shared between two voices that once stared across weapon sights. No anthem plays. No victory declared, just a simple, impossible thing, connection. And in that impossible thing, a new war begins, not to conquer, but to understand. It starts with whispers, not commands, not treaties, just subtle deviations from the script, a Zithari. Youth, barely of age, mutters a human poem in a dialect their ancestors once vowed to extinguish. The words carry poorly in their mandibles, but they carry. On a distant patrol route, a human pilot draws a Vael'Shara glyph across the inside of their cockpit, an old sign of mourning turned into quiet defiance. These are not grand acts, they are fractures. Hairline silent, treasonous, but fractures spread. An officer hesitates before issuing fire commands. A scholar references enemy texts in an academy once purified of them. Curiosity replaces fear. Recognition bleeds into doctrine. Doubt, small, heretical, ungovernable, begins to root itself into the walls of war. The war is not over, but the illusion of its righteousness is bleeding, and in that slow, contaminating truth, something far more dangerous than peace begins. Understanding. The sky no longer burns, but the ground remembers. Each breath carries the metallic tang of old firestorms, ghosting through soil, and lungs like the residue of a scream long since swallowed. Charred stone towers, half buried in violet dust, lean like broken promises beneath constellations that once guided missiles. Two figures sit beneath that quiet ruin. No flag, no armor, no anthem, just breath, just presence. Survivors, not of conquest, but of refusal. They do not recount the battles. The silence does it for them. Each pause is a name not spoken. Each heartbeat, a life not forgotten. They carry no delusions of glory. There is no medal for watching friends turn to shadow. No monument for choosing mercy over orders. The war has ended, yes, but the war does not end. It lingers in wounds that never close, in gazes that see what others flinch from. They do not speak of peace. They speak of endurance. Across the cold tapestry of deep space, a frequency fractures the silence. It is not laced with threat, nor wrapped in demand. It pulses with stillness, with precision. A voice, neither mechanical nor organic, speaks not to command, but to understand. We saw your scars. What do they mean? No name, no origin. Only that question, crystalline and impossible. It bypasses encryption and comprehension alike. It is not asking about strategy. It does not seek advantage. It probes deeper, into the marrow of what it means to bleed and remember. It challenges both species, not on their strength but on their suffering. In that moment, neither Corin nor Vael'Shara replies, because the answer is not in words. It is in the ache behind every breath, in the choices that cost more than survival, in the decision to heal without erasing pain. For the first time, the void does not echo. It listens. The response is not broadcasted. It is lived. No anthem follows, no declaration, just a shared stillness where meaning breathes between heartbeats. The message does not ride on authority, nor carry the weight of any world's flag. It echoes in something older, earned pain, quiet reverence, and the kind of resilience that outlasts ideology. The scars are not hidden, they are not dramatized. They are shown, plain, unadorned, unapologetic, not to provoke, but to connect. Her story inked not in ink, but in survival. Somewhere beyond warfronts and diplomacy, a frequency shifts, and the universe listens, not because it is told, but because it feels. The stars have not changed. Still endless, still cold, still watching. But now they echo not with orders barked through fleet channels, not with detonations or diplomatic decrees, but with a whisper, unmistakable, undeniable. We heard you. Across constellations that murmur travels. Not as challenge, not as surrender, but as question. The kind of question that breaks empires and births civilizations. Not who will win, but who will understand. No banners wave in this new dawn. No anthems rise, only an invitation. To listen, to answer, to become more than survivor, more than soldier, to be worthy of the stars.